Let's be honest, law school has fundamentally wrecked the ability of most lawyers to communicate in a way that sounds even vaguely human. I'm not suggesting that your law school has done this on purpose, but generally speaking, they do it incidentally as a consequence of what you learn in law school and how you learn to demonstrate your knowledge in a particular legal area. What happens in law school as a general rule? Think back. I don't know how far you have to think back. I've got to think back a fair way. But law school is more designed to teach you the law. And as a consequence, what you do in law school generally is you read legislation or statute and you read case law. You might be reading these landmark decisions that are written 100 years ago in a very different style to what we adopt today. You might be reading cases and legislation that isn't necessarily written in a way for normal people to consume. You are then examined. You are examined not subjectively, which is how, of course, people function in the real world, but objectively against a set of criteria, none of which is generally, would the client have thrown this in the bin because it's a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo? Therein lies the difference. What you have learned to do in law school, both through what you have consumed and what you have output, is to produce legal essays. A legal essay is a particular academic style of legal writing. And even in those law schools where you are encouraged to do things like draft a letter of advice to X, look at what happens behind that. I know you've put a letter on it, and you've put an address on it and a subject line. You've put it in the confines of what seems to be a letter, but the purpose of the assignment is still just to test your knowledge. It's to test your contract law knowledge, or it's to test your knowledge about the laws of estoppel or how trusts work or whatever it may be. That is the purpose of the assignment. And so as a consequence, what you put into that, you shouldn't think is going to be the same as what you should actually put into a letter of advice. They are very, very different creatures. A legal essay and an academic paper have very little place in an advice to a normal person in business or in private life, because it's not approachable by them. So as you embark on your legal career, I want you to be very keenly aware of your writing style, and in particular who you are writing for and what manner you are writing in. I know you can write a research paper. I know you can write an academic paper. You can probably do it far better than I ever did. But can you write an advice to a client that is actually useful, that gives them the answers they want in a way they understand? If a client has to pick up the phone and call you to figure out what your letter of advice actually said, then you have failed in your job as a lawyer. If a client goes away scratching their head, having to spend 3/4 of an hour reading a 27-page essay in order to arrive at a simple answer, what is my level of damages, for example, then you failed in your job. Of course, sometimes you want to explain your reasoning, but how are you demonstrating that? How are you going to display it? How are you going to set it out in a way that gives the clients what they asked for, while simultaneously giving them what they might need over the longer run? This is the challenge of communication, and I'm not here to pretend that it's easy. What I'm here to encourage you to do is to get out of the mindset that what you learned to do in law school was to communicate as a lawyer. It is far from it. Your job as a lawyer is to communicate with people, and people are different. Everyone is different. Everyone will have different preferences. Everyone will have different expectations. Everyone will read things differently, and everyone will want things presented in a slightly different way. And part of your job in listening to people and figuring out what kind of person they are and how they're going to appreciate or not an advice being delivered to them is to have that in your mind. You've got to ask the question. You've got to be paying attention, and you've got to deliver the advice that's going to be most well consumed by the client. Now, that is just advice, of course, and there are many forms of communication. But because we spend so much time writing, I think that legal drafting is a very important part of the equation. How are you going to communicate in writing? Are you going to sound like a person? Or are you going to sound extra super lawyery? And if so, why? Or are you just defaulting to that because it's become second nature? Think about that. Think about how you would portray an advice on a complex topic, if you needed to a person who was not a sophisticated consumer of legal resources. How are you going to demonstrate that to them? How are you going to explain to them their rights in ways that they will appreciate and understand, without resorting to legalese, without using jargon, without having a laundry list of a glossary? How are you going to do that? That is part of your job. Get rid of what law school taught you in terms of communication. Start thinking about people again.